Rejoice for the human body. Praise be to these legs that lift us up from the earth that bring us closer to the sun. Hosanna, Hosanna is the sailor's song. And looking down into the water.
Welcome to Mazecast. Happy New Year, everybody, almost. We are here with Greg, Vince, myself, and Heather, and we have an exciting episode for you today. We took about 30 seconds of careful planning to make sure it all went off without a hook. So here we are. So it's been a while since we've done an episode. Not sure. We're smart people. The discussion will eventually go in the direction we want it to go. Vince recently wrote a write-up about Maze. I would say it's beginner to intermediate level reading if you don't know what the fuck we're all about, which is a good thing because usually it's a little inaccessible. People find it a little irritating at times, the lack of solutions and stuff. But anyway, Vince, you want to talk about your critique?
I guess so. I mean, I guess that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I guess just to give an overview of it,
Okay.
what I intended to do with I don't know if you want to call it an essay or a blog post or whatever, that I've entitled, Too Long Didn't Read, is just to explain that although we know that there are bad puzzles with bad solutions in Maze, that's not a sufficient reason to abandon all sense of reason in trying to find puzzles and suggest solutions to them. And I guess in particular what I've said is if you look at the bad puzzles that we know that are in there, in particular the answers to the main riddles, the ones that solved the contest back in the 80s, the riddle of the maze in room 45, the riddle of the path along, the 16-step path. What we see in those is that although those are unfair and unsolvable puzzles, you can see that there was a logic that Manson had in proceeding from the answer he wanted you to get through some kind of encoding process that just eventually ended up being too hard for anyone to reverse and work backwards from, but that made sense from Manson's perspective going forward. It was always something like taking the letters of a word and mixing them up to make other words, or separating them in some way, or making a rebus. There was something relatively traditional and sensible about the way that he constructed the puzzles. He just didn't take enough care to ensure that there was a way to go back from the clues that he was giving to actually get the answer. Whereas the bad solutions that people are more often suggesting for Maze kind of only make sense in the opposite direction. And I give a few examples. Maybe the best example I give in there is the solution that's been suggested for room 8, which just has to do with bowling. It just says, hey, there's a lot of stuff in the room that seems like it has to do with bowling, and a perfect game of bowling involves 12 strikes, therefore the right answer is door 12. And that's a deduction that doesn't really make any sense. Like, if Manson's building a puzzle and he's trying to encode the answer 12 and give it to you, just making some references to bowling does not represent the number 12. The only way you come to that solution is if you start at the end and you say, all right, I've got this observation. There's some bowling stuff in the room, and I know the answer is door 12. So what bowling to door 12? And then you say, 12, that's the number of strikes in a perfect game of bowling. So that's how we connect those two dots. But it only seems sensible when you're working backwards like that, when you're taking some observation of the room and you know what the answer is that you want to get, and so you look for a way to connect them. It doesn't make sense from the other side, from Manson's perspective, where you start with the answer that you want to clue, find a way to encode that answer in the room. It's 12 just does not encode to bowling.
At the same time, you got a lot of other things thrown into the room as well, which might be confusing because you have no idea what Manson intended. And at the same time, it's obfuscated by the whole bowling thing. So it's like, do you think of bowling? Are you supposed to combine it with the clown or whatever that is, the switch? Like, what are you to do with those things? Are those guide puzzles? Like, it's hard to differentiate. You know what I mean? What is a door clue and what might be something else?
Yeah, and I think that's, I guess, why people jump from observation to solution, because that's probably about as close as you can get to a solution most of the time. Like, you see something about a room and you feel like, I've got this interesting observation. I really have seen something interesting in this room, but it doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't get me to the answer. And so you feel like you haven't really accomplished anything. So you just make up some cockamamie means of interpretation to say that, oh, this interesting observation I've made tells me that the door is 17, because that's the number of times that Paul McCartney changed his shoes on the 65 tour of the United States. And the thing is, it seems to be the vast majority of what's going on. As I detail the process in the essay, sort of satirically, but not really, it seems to be that the main process for solving puzzles, finding puzzles, whatever, is to note some observation about the room, go on Wikipedia and read anything you can about that subject and find something that connects to the door number you want, and then saying, aha, this is the connection between that observation and the door that tells you to take that door. And it doesn't seem that we have much reason to believe that Manson constructed puzzles that way. We know that there are bad puzzles in there, but the bad puzzles we know about, the good puzzles we know about, none of them seem to work that way. And in general, I think it's just puzzles don't work that way. People don't make puzzles that work that way, because it doesn't work.
Here's what I'm thinking about that right now, and that is that he's not making puzzles, or it's possible that his intention is not to make puzzles in the way where you can solve it like a crossword, right? Or like, a standard puzzle, but that you would just, like, the puzzles of Maze are more like a poem versus a fiction or a nonfiction. He's not trying to explain things out. He's kind of like maybe not sure himself exactly how someone would interpret it and solve the puzzle. And I think part of that is there is like a laziness and puzzle construction, in that he's not putting it, not laziness, but he's not putting himself in the shoes of the solver when he makes it. But it's more like he's just kind of creating these, and you have to kind of solve them in the same way you would solve a poem. And in a poem, you're not going to like actually know what the poem's about, because the poem, like a good poem, I don't think is just about one thing. It's about, it's like something that communicates with you. And I think that's maybe what Maze does too, but it's using puzzles instead of poetry.
Well, except those really aren't puzzles. I mean, if what he's done is create like an assemblage of objects that's supposed to give you a feeling of which way to go, that's not really what you would call a puzzle. But
right.
I'm not sure that we have any really good evidence to say that is what he's doing anyway. I mean, I think the problem is we've got a vast majority of the book that we don't know what to make of, and we could conclude that what it is puzzles that we're not able to understand, which seems fairly likely because the solutions that we were given to the contest are completely unsolvable. No one would have ever gotten those. So it seems certainly plausible that the rest of the book is full of similarly difficult, unfair solutions, and we just can't solve them, and that's why we don't know what to make of them. But I guess the current majority view maybe is, I think, what you're saying, that no, the problem is just that we haven't been interpreting these things correctly, and we have to be a little more free-form and
That's not entirely what I'm saying. I agree, actually, wholeheartedly, that he, in construction of these things, is not thinking about how the end user is going to engage with them. I think in some respects he's trying to put in puzzles that he makes sense to him because he knows the answer already, and
Mhm.
someone else would get it. But he doesn't do the work to go backwards and think like, what? Okay, if you've seen this with fresh eyes, how are you going to experience it? I think there is a lot of incidents of that as well. I think there are several like streams going into Maze. It's not like he's not just making all the puzzles one way. I think he has this interpretive thing, this kind of poem thing that I was talking about going on, but he's also just like it's a young medium. I think what he's doing. There's not like a lot of iterations of what he's doing, which is partially why we are doing so many maze casts about it, because otherwise, but he's not. So there are problems with his work. There are problems with his work, but I don't think that's all of the misconceptions we have.
Do you think that some of the problems with his work have anything to do with the fact that he has so many cross paths? You have to worry about room interconnections as a designer, right? As a game designer, you have to worry about all those interconnections and making sure that stuff is airtight. And sometimes the more subjective aspects of it might take a back seat to that, to making sure that there might be some lawsuits involved if somebody claims to get the $10,000 prize at that time. But you know what I mean? Like, there are certain facts that I think are solid in Maze, such as the 16-room path. But I think it's possible that all that other stuff, because he was rushed, from what we understand, that maybe some of the other stuff took a back seat, like maybe that typo in room 13.
I don't know what typo you're talking about, but I could find that out by looking at the book.
Millennium is misspelled.
What is?
The word millennium on the wall.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I don't think the problems are production oriented, really. Would be my guess. Because I think he had this book made and then went to a publisher. I'm just kind of guessing. I don't really know. But it is true that he exists in the world and he exists within time. So there could be like pressures that made him, like he's not working on Maze for the entirety of his life and then dying, and then Maze is just done. At some point he has to say that Maze is done.
I'm not sure what you're getting at with that.
I'm just saying I don't think that like the problems that we're seeing with Maze are necessarily because of external pressures. It's not because of publishing. It's not because of.
I don't think so either. I can't imagine executive meddling resulting in this. I mean, if anything, the executive were meddling with the book, this should make more sense.
Yeah, I don't think there was executive meddling. Right. That's kind of where I'm going. Like, I think the book was, he made the book and then gave it to the publishers, and then they just published it. I don't think that.
Yeah,
this makes more sense.
He had to change the title of the book from Labyrinth to Maze, at the publisher's insistence because the movie Labyrinth was coming out or had come out or something like that. But I think that's the only substantive change he had to make to it.
Yeah. And looking at the book, like one of the attractive things about it is there is this like holistic like personal vision, right? There is like an individual behind the entirety of it. Whereas if it didn't have an individual like behind the whole thing, if there was like a group, like say if it was a movie, Maze the movie, some of the problems that we are having or and that your essay pointed out would have been like maybe fixed, but then some of the magic might have been, you know, some of the other elements would have been lost as a result of that. But since it was pretty much it's a pretty, you know, it's pretty much Christopher Manson's Maze. It's not like what's the publisher?
Henry Holt.
Yeah, it's not Harry Holt's Maze. It's not like a group of people worked on it. It feels to me like it's Christopher Manson's Maze. And
Well, yeah, I wouldn't go tampering with Maze. And the point of my essay was not to point out how stupid the puzzles in Maze are. Like, I think that's been amply addressed. Like, I didn't say anything new in there in terms of, you know, saying the main solution here is unsolvable. Like, I did that a million different ways for as long as we've been talking about Maze. But really, and I said this in a comment replying to another commenter on it, but I haven't really written up much about it. I don't think the problem with Maze from an aesthetic perspective is that the main solution was so bad. The problem is that they had to reveal the solution as part of that contest, which is bound to irritate people who are working towards this solution with the point of view that this is something solvable. It should be reasonably solvable within a reasonable period of time, you know, if there's this contest about it. And then it turns out, nope, it was not, and you were not going to solve it.
yeah.
But if he had never had to reveal the answer, I think it would have worked much better. I mean, we never would have gotten the answer, but we could have picked apart pieces of the answer. We could have felt like we were getting incrementally closer to something. It would have been something we could have worked on in regard to the book, which ultimately is what's so attractive about the book. If it were full of, you know, 45 different puzzles that with hard work could be solved, we would have been done with it a long time ago. If it were full of 45 rooms with a bunch of puzzles that no one could make any sense of, you couldn't make any headroom on it or headway on it, there wouldn't be anything for us to talk about. You know, we could take a look at it and say, hey, these pictures are nice and this is kind of groovy, but that's about it. It's the mixture there. It kind of tantalizes you with the hope of understanding by having a few puzzles here that you can solve and some connections here that you can make, but ultimately remains vastly mysterious. And that's a very attractive thing. And I think it's really the powerful aesthetic balance that Maze has that between understandability and, I guess, crypticness. Those are probably the worst words I could use to name those two sides. But it's the balance between those two things that just works so well in Maze. I wouldn't change that for anything, despite all the complaining that I do about the puzzles. Puzzle solutions are not the whole story with regard to Maze. And I really think that it's problematic mainly because Manson had to show his hand and tell us, yeah, here are the awful solutions.
Well, and I wonder if, like, from his perspective as creator, which is kind of like what all of this boils down to, like, what is his intention? Which I actually don't think is totally what Maze is about, because the intention of an individual is not necessarily all that goes into a work. there are things that could happen in a finished product, which Maze is. It's a finished product. It's out there. It's in the world that he maybe isn't even aware of, because there's subconscious at work. There are influences from outside at work. But anyway, I'm going on a tangent. I forget what I was saying. So I think beyond that, even beyond what his intentions are, I've totally lost my thread. Why don't you talk some more while I think a second?
That's what when I lose my thread, I just talk through it. I don't stop to think.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you talked about interpreting Maze more as a poem, and I think that's fair game, but that is not part of puzzle solution, I don't think. I think there are elements in Maze that are there for purely aesthetic purposes, and I think that there are things he does that appear to be clues that are not, that sort of tilt that direction. And we've talked about before on the show how he does the same thing in Maze that he does in Practical Alchemist, where he has all these lines in the text that just clearly refer you to the wrong thing. And it's not necessarily anything deeper than that. It's just he'll throw some line in the text that is a pun or a veiled reference to something in the room, just to make you start thinking about that connection. But it's not part of a broader puzzle. It's not something that you can solve. It's just something that he's constantly doing, whether to mislead or to intrigue or whatever. There are elements like that, but I guess I don't think that there's much evidence to suggest that rooms in the maze are intended to be interpreted more freely or poetically. Which is not to say it's impossible. If that is what's going on, I'd say those are not puzzles. If you did want to call them puzzles, I would still say that it's essentially impossible to solve those, because it would just be like by sheer chance that you would stumble upon the same interpretation that Manson had.
So is this a problem of genre then, because it's called like, so I guess we can go back to the publisher. I don't know who said it was like the world's like hardest puzzle, right? It's not made, it solved the world's most challenging puzzle. I doubt that was like the title he came up with. Solve the world's most challenging puzzle.
Well, it might be, because the answer to the riddle ultimately is the world, Earth. That seems like it could have been his intent, that he put that line up there.
But whoever did, maybe like the fact that it was just called a puzzle, maybe that's the problem you're wrestling with. That like it's not a puzzle. Like there are rooms where the solution is not a puzzle at all. It's just like you have to figure out what to look at. Like 33. Is it 33?
I don't know.
Yeah, 33. Okay. So there's, with exaggerated caution, considering their predicament, they finally reach the door. Okay, so if you just read that partial sentence, okay, and look at the picture, and you really look at the picture, and the puzzle is just seeing that one of the boards is more secure than the others. Okay, whether you buy that or not, I mean, that if you buy that solution, that's not a puzzle. That's just you're just seeing what's there and being able to, like, I guess you have to kind of puzzle through what's like pertinent information and what's not. But that works. You can solve the room with that partial sentence and the picture.
Well, and maybe to put it more concretely, like without having the maybe you buy it, maybe you don't. Think about the rooms where they say, you know, we opened a door and went through it. And you can look at the picture and see that Some of the doors are already open, so that's not the door they went through. I mean, you're right. Is that a puzzle? Do you call that a puzzle? I mean, it seems to be a fairly literal, straightforward application of what it says in the text. There doesn't seem to be a lot of puzzling going on to it. Although you do have to.
I think like one of the fun things about Maze, or one of the things that draws people to Maze, is that it's not just a puzzle book. It's not a puzzle book. There's more. Like it communicates with you in a different way that a puzzle might. You interact with it in a different way than a puzzle might. I think maybe Manson was intending for it to be a puzzle book, perhaps, but I think probably for sure. But I think he put more into it than that, or he's working in different dimensions than other than just the puzzle dimension. Like there are. I want to be careful here because I don't want to be like, but there are like messages he's trying to get across with the book that aren't just like purely puzzle. Like the ultimate riddle of the maze, for example. The answer is the world, right?
Yeah.
Am I right about that? I don't quite remember, but
Yes.
like the world seems like that could be fairly esoteric. He could have it be ice cream. He could have it be anything, right? But he chooses that, and I think they're like, whether it's like he mapped it out intentionally, which I think a lot of Maze he didn't really. I think there's some like bones there, but I think a lot of the flesh. There's like a process he's going through. He's working with visual art. He's putting things down. It's not necessarily all like I'm doing this because of this when he's doing it. I think there's a little more feeling to what's going on, and maybe that's what makes Maze difficult, because when you're trying to interpret Maze or going through Maze, you're not necessarily going through feeling. You're not feeling your way through Maze, which I think is what he thinks people are going to do. They're going to feel their way through the Maze, but then there's this very like cerebral, like non-feeling task that you're supposed to do, like do it in 16 steps, which is like numerical. So that's immediately like pulls you out of the feeling sense. So it's kind of like there's these two things Maze is doing that are in conflict in a way, because a lot of the clues are like kind of feeling based, and as such you can't really pin them down. You can't pin down like, oh, this is darker right here, and like all the sum of all these different parts make you want to go this way. You can't really pin that down. It's not a puzzle. But at the same time, you're supposed to do these things in order to get to these numbers and get back in a certain amount of time.
Hey, Barry came in when we were talking, if you didn't notice.
I did notice that. I'm really happy to see that. Hi, Barry.
Oh, maybe he's unmiked.
No, it doesn't have the unmic thing. I think he's just not saying anything. Now he's working on it. We've had some technical issues before we started this Mazecast.
And also during every other Mazecast we've ever done.
Yeah, but also this one.
We were quite surprised to find out that this was not the first Mazecast without technical difficulties. We really assumed this was going to be the one. I think you're correct, and I don't think it's inadvertent. I think there are things in the room that are supposed to just give you feelings about which way to go without knowing why. But I don't think that they don't point in the right direction all the time. And I think you're right that they're not what you would call puzzles. It is like a separate layer of what's going on in there.
Well, and I think you're also right in that it's kind of like...
You go to room 34 and you see a guy walking.
There was a problem.
A little bit.
Yeah. But I think you're also right that it's like if you sit down and puzzle it out, it's arbitrary, like what is actually a clue for what. in a lot of cases. One thing about your essay is that your essay didn't draw upon the text a lot, and I haven't gone through it and like compared the rooms that you said were problematic and compared it. Like I think a lot of people when they look at Maze, they look at the visuals or the text, and they don't look at them together. And all of this is with the caveat that I think Maze is imperfect in terms of actually being able to go through it and solve it. I think I don't think that it's possible to do that without actually knowing the rooms. You can solve the puzzles after you know the rooms, but I lost my train of thought. Barry's on two things now. So I have a solution that I want to throw out, and just I want to, using your essays ideas, I want you to pick it apart.
Oh,
And
before you say, let me say, because I don't think I was clear about that I guess as long as the essay is, and as much as I say in it, the main takeaway is when you come up with a solution, I'm suggesting that you consider it from Manson's perspective when he was making the puzzle. What did Manson mean to communicate, and how did he go about encoding that solution, rather than thinking about it sort of backwards and saying, I have this observation, how do I connect it to the correct door? So it's just, I just asked those essentially two questions for solutions. What did Manson mean to communicate, and how did he encode that communication?
right. And actually, instead of talking about what I was going to talk about, I want to address that instead. I don't think Manson's intention is the ultimate end-all, be-all for Maze. I think, like, when you create something, a work of art, which I think Maze is a work of art, your intentions aren't the end-all, be-all of what that work of art should be or what it is saying. Okay, I could make a picture, right? And what I intended to make for that picture doesn't actually have like a direct bearing on that picture. So I can make a picture that is like kind of confusing and people could see different things in it. Like say I made a cloud and like there's lines in it and you could see a face or you could see a dragon or you could see, you know, a chair, whatever you see in that. Me making the picture, like I could say like I was just making a cloud, that doesn't mean that that's really what the picture is, especially as the work gets more complex. There are things your conscious mind is intending and kind of directing that isn't necessarily everything that even your whole body put into the work, because your conscious mind only sees like a very slim amount of what you're actually doing. I think of the conscious mind as like the political system of a nation state, for example. So, like, I could do something, and the government has no idea what I'm doing. If that makes sense. So, like, if like a, you know, if you make something, that doesn't mean that you really are even the final word. You're not the arbiter of what that thing is, because you aren't the only person who made that thing. You like your conscious mind isn't. You didn't like plan it out. You're not an architect. You didn't map it out. What's that?
I don't know what that noise was.
I was going to say that's an interesting point.
Okay,
Like
cool.
Manson's created a new Bible, and we're his broken telephone apostates.
But we're not. The book's
Yeah, that sounds good. No, look, I have no problem with what you're saying, Greg, but it's not the same way with puzzles. And you could look at it that way, and I mean, that's sort of, like we could all take a Gentilian turn on it, right? And we could just say, let's just say weird shit about the book. Let's just find anagrams everywhere. Let's try to take any piece of arcane knowledge that we can dig up and just apply it to the book. And our puzzles and puzzle solutions are going to be a creative act by us in interpreting the book, not an attempt to figure out what Manson was doing. I mean, obviously you can do that if you want. That's not offensive or anything. But that's not what people are doing when they're trying to find puzzles and solutions. Like
So
they're
is
trying
the
to find.
criticism of the attempt, or is the criticism of the work?
In what regard?
So, like, is the problem with what you're saying the way people are trying to, like, engage with Maze that you're seeing online? Is the problem that they are trying to, like, their whole purpose is to sleuth out intention from the conscious mind of Charles Manson, or Christopher Manson, sorry. Or is the problem that the work, you know, you're not actually, if you were to like look at the book without the internet, you wouldn't be able to like figure it out.
Well, and if I'm understanding what you're asking correctly, the problem is that they are trying to determine Manson's intentions, but I believe they're going about it incorrectly. Right? I share the same goal that they do. I want to try to figure out what Manson intended, to figure out the solutions that he put in there, but I think that they're going about it in a bad way.
Okay.
In a way that's going to return a lot of, I guess, false positives, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah.
In terms of what they consider to be solutions.
And I think your ideas are compelling in that respect. Like I think it's if you're trying to be like, it's kind of like you're doing both camps, right? Like you're able to just kind of interpret it how you want. At the same time, you already have the solutions, and then you can find it like the Bible. You can just, if you start out with like you want this particular thing to be true, you can find evidence in the Bible to support that. So let me go through a solution with you.
Okay.
And just see what, like, how you could break that down with your thing. So this is a multi-room solution because I've been thinking about multi-room stuff lately, and because of my work for Sarah Goodchild, I'm starting with room 35. Okay, so room 35, we have that this kind of like thing in the middle here. Oh yeah, the camera's not the screen over there. All right, and they're talking about perhaps it's a signal to us. The thoughtful one said. And I think the thoughtful one, what she says is kind of important. A warning or direction. There's some other text, and I still think it's a signal. Yes, I said right away. I'm sure you're right. Okay, then you have to go to 33, unless you find some secret room in 35. All right. So signal is the key word to think about here. Signal, which is spelled S-I-G-N-A-L. The second paragraph of room 33 is realizing that they could see all of the signs only from the center of the room. Several wanted to turn back. So if you turn back there, and you're coming from 35, and I think a lot of the multi-room things are kind of like hypothetical from where you're coming from. I know that's not compelling to you, which is why I'm happy for you to tear this apart later.
Oh no, let me interrupt you for a second, because the opposite is true. There are statements in rooms that seem to apply when you come from one particular room but not another. Like, for instance, when you go to 38 and it talks about how there was some confusion as they made their entrance, that obviously works better if you just came down the slide from 41 than if you just walked in a door from somewhere else. Like, that seems to be what that's referring to.
Right,
it's just referring to it as slightly as possible so that it doesn't make absolute another door. So
But you didn't like the comfort solution.
What's that?
You didn't like the comfort solution to, I think, 25, was it? Multi-room thing. Anyway, I think we're going off. I don't want to get on too much of a tangent there.
No, but anyway, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if they turn back, they go back to 33. several ones to turn back, so it's like reference the room you were just in.
Mm-hmm.
33, it has that arm that's pointing towards 3. Okay, so just for fun, we're going to say like, oh, you got that, which I don't think you would, which goes to your criticism, I think. Like you wouldn't like, this is not something you would pick out by just reading through the book. Maybe you would. That's why I think the visitor episodes of Mazecast are so helpful, because you can kind of get the more impressionistic view. So then we go back to 3, which is a room full of signs. So we have two rooms of signs going towards this room.
Wait. I'm not sure I get what you're saying about going to 3.
Okay, so in 35,
Yeah.
we have that weird thing in the middle of the room, center of the room, near center.
Maybe it's a signal.
Thing going off to the side.
Yeah.
It's got the glove. It's pointing to the left. Okay, and there's also lots of mentions of directions. There's 2 instances of right and 1 of left there. And then in 33, you go left, which is where the glove is pointing.
Okay, so you're just saying 33 references 35 because you should follow the signal in 35 and 33.
The like, mysterious thing of that thing in the middle of the room is just to point you left. Okay. So then when you get to 33, you're at the room with a lot of signs. Okay. So we've had the signal, we've had signs from the middle of the room. You can only see them all from the middle of the room in 33. And then in 3, we have all these signs, and the sign that's in the middle of the room is the one that points the right way to go. And that's it. So am I just like seeing stuff because I'm trying to see stuff, or was it intended, or is it both?
I guess I would put some of this kind of on the level of sort of an observation between the 3 rooms, but not really amounting to a solution in them. Like that's. I have trouble seeing the thing in 35 as being somehow clued as telling you to follow the sign in 3, or I mean, it seems a little attenuated, I guess, to say the least. To say, I mean, it does point the correct way. Like, if you take the thing in 35 and move it to 33, it does point the right way. I don't know that saying some of them wanted to turn back is a strong enough reason to. Well, okay, let's ask the question. So, what was Manson trying to say with this stuff, or what was he trying to communicate? I don't know why I rephrased it that way, as if communicate somehow clarified. What is he trying to maybe create a trail of signs for you to follow? Like, is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. So Manson's purpose here was to create a trail for us to follow of signs pointing the right way. And the way he did it was by, in 35, having a sign pointing the right way, in 3, having a sign pointing the right way, in 33, mentioning turning back.
Well, and it has you can only see the signs from the center of the room. So they each explicitly mention signs or signals.
Okay.
So this is a text-based way of, it's like more on the left side of the book than the right side.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not trying to describe it uncharitably. Probably the opposite. I want to try to describe it as accurately. So let's say in 33, some continued textual references to signage and the reference to turning back, which could reference a signal that appeared in what could be the room you just came from. It doesn't seem to me like this is not one of the most, like, this is not like criminally implausible, I guess I would say. Like, this is not something I would have used as an example in my essay of, look at this ridiculous stuff that people are saying Manson intended. I don't know that the evidence is strong enough to convince me that he did intend these things, but that's a totally separate issue. Like, just in terms of looking at this, are we looking at what's there and trying to imagine a far-fetched connection backwards to what we know is the right answer? Or can we look at it from Manson's perspective and work forward? I mean, I think you can imagine it from Manson's perspective and work forward. I don't feel like it's totally there enough to convince me that it means anything, or it's certainly not solid enough that I think you would believe that it meant anything if you didn't already know what the right directions were. But again, those are separate issues.
Yeah, well, but those are tied into what we're talking about, right? Like,
well, not necessarily. I mean, even Manson's revealed solutions were sometimes so bad that people didn't believe them even when they were revealed. So the fact that something is not sensible enough that it's readily believed doesn't mean that it's wrong. I mean, I consider that a totally separate issue. There are a lot of things that can be wrong with a solution, and I'm just trying to address one particular issue when I say think about it from Manson's perspective instead of, starting with an observation and jumping to the conclusion you want.
right. But from his perspective, I think partially like what kind of led me to this solution actually was your essay. Like, from his perspective, I could see him being like, oh, I say sign here, I say sign here, I say sign here. People can figure that out. Because there's this kind of like, there's this inattentiveness or this like inability to connect with the end user, the person who's going to actually be reading Maze, so that he will put these seeds down or these things down that make sense because he's looking at it from his perspective. And he already knows the answer, so it's like, of course, yeah, oh yeah, this is great. But someone else is just not going to get it. What am I looking at?
Try this.
Hi, Barry.
Barry, what are you up to this New Year's Eve? We're just not going to get as much Barry as we want.
No. Can you? Who's in charge of like what we see? Can we just see Barry's screen? Because I think he is the best screen. Alex, you're muted. I see your lips moving, but I can't hear what you're saying.
Classic.
Right.
Yes.
Here we go. So, do you want me to shut it off? Are you guys done?
No, we want to see.
I'm having difficulties.
Oh yeah, we just want to see Barry's screen. Can you make it so we
You want Barry?
just see Barry's screen?
Oh wow, it is midnight though, or just about.
Happy New Year.
Good.
50 seconds. Let's do the countdown. Hold on. Here we go.
17, 15.
T-minus 10,
3,
9, 8,
8.
7,
We
6,
should actually go through
5,
Maze order, like.
4, 3, 2,
84.
1.
Good.
Happy New Year.
He forgot.
It is now 2016, so we have to devote the entire year to room 16.
Good. Which one?
Wow, let me tell you something,
Wait.
folks. This is the
What's room
saddest
16?
New Year's celebration imaginable.
I've had worse.
Well, we did it. All right.
Cool.
Oh man, I can't believe we've been talking about this for. Well, I don't know why I say I can't believe that. We've talked about like the furniture in a room for an hour before.
We've talked about Maze for years. Like, in like multiple years. So like, it's one book that like the current hypothesis is that it wasn't like created off of nothing. It just, it's like, how is it unbelievable that we'd still be talking about it? Because none of us believe that there's like anything to talk about.
Man, yeah. If we had a train of thought going before 11:59, we've lost it now.
Yeah, and that's great. That's great. Let's talk to Barry. Barry, what have you done today?
Well, I went to work and stuff, and then I stopped, and then I was trying to join here, and then that's it in a nutshell.
You had some
All right. So I'm going to shut this down soon because I want to play some music and I can't do it with you guys here. Do you guys have anything else to add to
You're like kicking us out? What? Oh, it's New Year's. You're kicked out.
Okay, I'll let you keep going. There you go.
How about you give us 2 minutes and no, 3 minutes, and then just stop it no matter what's happening.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, without warning.
Without warning, yeah. Just do it. Here's what
Will
I'll
do.
Dark holes, which is nice. This is of room 33, which is one of the rooms we talked about on this episode of Maze.
Yeah, I was trying to get to that, but I'm slow. I'll have it fade in like Bureau's 33. I could mirror it. I don't know how to do that. Oh yes, I can. There we go. Pow.
Whoa.
How do I get back to that thing? Okay, there it is. Where are you going? Let's up it. Up it. There we go. Yeah, that's at 33. No, come back here.
Those are evil-looking E's, actually.
Yeah. And that's the...
And the problem is, it's not going to focus in on his room for the viewers, I don't think.
I think it is.
It's up to what SP decides.
Yeah, I think he made it so it's just going to be Barry's screen now.
Oh, did he? Good.
Yeah, so it's good. Because it's not switching back when I call.
Maybe 3 minutes was a little too much.
Yeah, we don't have much to say anymore.
I mean, if we had said 2 hours, I think we would have been fine. We could have filled 2 hours.